The guests who join Kevin Mulhern, Kenneth Robinson and me today, Phil Young, Sandy Gaul, Gael Elton Mayo and Glenn Worsnett, who successfully completed the BH basement corridor run and thereby earned his Start the Week beret. Glenn is writer and presenter of a series that starts on BBC One on Thursday evening called The Paras, and that was the signature tune. I've seen an episode in advance, and jumping out of an aircraft is only one of the things they have to go through that would paralyse me with fright. Glenn, did you jump?
I didn't, no. I'm the sort of reporter who likes to stay in the background.
Sandy Gaul, ITN newscaster and foreign correspondent, lists in his autobiographical volume, Don't Worry About the Money Now, the 4 things which are never forgiven a foreign correspondent. The first is to be a coward. The second is to drop his colleagues in it. I paraphrase what you actually said. The third is to be mean. The fourth, a long way behind, is to get things wrong. If he combines 2 or more, he's virtually beyond the pale. When were you most tempted to be a coward, Sandy?
Oh, lots of times. I think most recently in Afghanistan, when the Russians were bombing us.
What happened there? What was the situation?
Well, we were trying to make a documentary, which we did finally make for Central, and we went to a valley called the Panjshir Valley, and we ran into a Russian offensive, which consisted of a lot of bombing, and followed up by a ground attack, and the bombing was really quite nasty.
Wouldn't you just rather sit in the studio and read it?
No, I get bored sitting in the studio. So I like to go out now and again.
Gail Elton Mayo is a name which may not be familiar to everybody. She's a painter, a novelist and a journalist who worked closely at one time with 2 great photographers who were killed in Vietnam and Suez, respectively, Robert Capa and David Seymour. To be a war photographer and a coward would be impossible, I think, Gail.
Well, Capa was actually frightened, although he was attracted to war, to any battle scene, because he hated it so much he wanted to show it up. In the days before, people had television sets and nobody knew, unless reading Picture Post or Paris Match. People didn't seem to know what war was like, and he felt driven to go and take photographs. He actually jumped out of an aeroplane once, I believe, parachute. But he also, with David Seymour, who hated violence even more, they were both killed trying to show up the horrors of war. A sort of paradox.
Gail, you've had your own kind of fights in your life, which are related in a book that comes out this week. You call it the MAD MOSAIC. It's hard to give a kind of brief guide to that mosaic. You were born in America, you were sent to Europe as a child. Your first child was born during the German bombardment of Bordeaux. A terrifying story of escape back to America, and then many blows of fate later. You were struck by cancer, from which you're still suffering, and after 4 operations you're still fighting on. Where does that strength come from?
Ah, what a question. Perhaps some people are just born happy. I don't know. I love everything. I like everything. Even when it's horrible, I try to get through somehow by making slogans to myself, such as an anecdote, if you like. When I had radiation for 6 weeks, the name of the street I had to go up was called Horseferry Road. So I thought, all right, I'm a horse. I've got blinkers. I won't look to left or right. I'll go straight on. At the end of the 6 weeks, I'll be Pegasus and I'll fly. That's one little way. You have to put thoughts into your head to get by things, to get through. I expect Sandy did it when he was in Uganda with another kind of fear, which was the equivalent of my crossing the German lines being shot at. Mm. But I found that very exhilarating afterwards.
I think I prayed, actually.
I prayed. But we had faith then we were going to get there.
Yeah.
Because there were 2 Gaullists with us and we were going to win the war. There was all this other, not just our own survival. Mm. But fear that's enough perhaps for now.
Well, Gail, your story isn't by any means consistently gloomy, as you probably suggested. There's lots of lovely moments of observation and humour. And I love the bit when you described the French playwright Arnoux as a Beatrix Potter mouse with glasses. I thought that was very delightful. And so to our 4th guest, Phil Young, who's devised and directed a new play called Crystal Clear, which had tremendous notices and which moved the public enormously when it opened at the Old Red Lion in Islington, and on Tuesday opens at Wyndham's Theatre in London. Gail, if other people who have never suffered from cancer write about it or attempt to make a play about it or express their views about it or try and imagine what it's like, do you think it's possible to imagine what it's like if you've never been through that particular experience?
I think, as you said about blindness, everyone's afraid of something all the time. And people who haven't had cancer, if they have an unknown pain, they might say, my goodness, I've got cancer. If you've had it, it's worse because it lurks around like a shadow in your life, and you think it might come. It's rather underhand illness, so you don't know, but you get used to it in the end. I mean, the fear, like I imagine we shared it's pretentious to say this, but I loved your book. And the Uganda thing, praying. And
this is Sandy Gall's book she loved. Let me tell you.
I love his book. Let's get on to that soon too.
Well, we will. Let me get on to it.
Fear, that sort of fear is almost exhilarating, because afterwards you think, God, that was awful, but I'm glad I know what it's like. The cancer thing's a drag, because it comes back 4 or 5 times. You think, oh no, not again, just when everything's fantastic, here it is. So you still have to adopt an attitude of, well, like now, I'm going to this thing Friday morning, and
to have another operation.
Say, okay, you've hung around too long like a drunk who doesn't leave the room at the end of the party, and it's all over, and I'm going on ahead and leave you behind. This is what I hope to say to it when I'm in my anesthetic sleep. But you have to make, you get jittery just talking about it, because I've lost the question you asked me.
No,
do you think everyone knows what it's like to have cancer? I hope they don't. But I'm lucky there are 20 different sorts, and maybe you do get over it. The message is very important to give. I met a radiologist who's now dead, and who said you must encourage people. And that's why I wrote into part 3 of the book about cancer, because it wasn't a especially jolly subject, and I might not have mentioned it at all. So I started to write this, and it came off quite well, because it's fortunately about all sorts of other things. This is knitted into your life, And then the irony was that when I'd finished it, page proofs October, cured, isn't it wonderful? Oh, bang, it was back. So that was a bit sort of sheepish arrangement.
I suppose what's so different about it from some of the other crises you've gone through in your life is that you have no apparent control over it, or do you feel that
you do, funny enough, the medical men who say, well, we're getting there gradually, we're not there yet, like people to fight it. And there is a sort of control if you can just hold on. This thing about holding on and saying, all right, it's fatuous to say that when we know that there are people who've died of it. But there are many people who haven't. And certainly hanging on, like crossing the German lines, whatever you do is, you just got to hold on.
You have the most extraordinary story to tell in your book. Gael Elton Mayo, just let me remind you, we're talking to, has written a book called The MAD MOSAIC, and it's a rather well-chosen title. Why did you choose it?
Well, it is a mosaic, because so many things. Originally, I wanted to talk about Capa and Shim, we've already mentioned, and the sort of brotherhood of when Magnum first started.
This was the group of photographers, including
no money behind them, no Reuters, nothing, and if they didn't work, there was no dinner. Literally, and this was the beginning of when these, and the tapestry behind all those people. That was in the day when it actually took off. It was in Paris. That was just after the war, with Sartre, with beautiful clothes, Marcel Rochas, with ups and downs of Magnum starving one minute, having a terrific job the next. And I wanted to weave this all into a sort of tapestry, which was like a mosaic. About Jean Anouilh, who never showed up at his own. He went to the opening of his plays and hid away and dashed off before the end. That was sort of funny way and how to knit this all together with one's theme going through it of survival. Or
you were born in America.
Australia.
Well, Australia.
Yes,
now, why did I get that wrong before?
Well, I don't know
why? But your parents, American.
Well, my father had a research life chair. He was Professor Emeritus at Harvard.
Yeah.
So we were there as children.
That's where the confusion came. But you were sent to Europe when you were 8.
I'm right. I've never had a home since. So obviously.
Why did they send you to Europe when you were 8 years old?
I think they wanted us. They felt European and wanted us to have a European education. And in the abstract, that's a very good idea. But when it boils down to it, a child just wants a tree. It knows a dog and piano or something, or its parents. So my sister and I were both thrown off balance completely. I think we managed to. But all these things, finding yourself married when you're 17 to a white Russian in the war in France. White Russians
I was fascinated by it. Did you find yourself married? Didn't you get married on purpose?
No, I didn't, but I don't want to hog everyone else's time. That's too long.
It's all right. I'll stop you when you're finished.
What's more interesting is that you find yourself sort of late developer anyway, only 17, married to someone who hasn't got a proper passport. Therefore, you're stuck. So we stayed in France. Then, all right, the baby was born in the bombardment of Bordeaux. I got puerperal fever. I nearly died. Went back to Paris. And then every day the English, the Jews, and the students had to register in the police book. So finally that came to an end and I was arrested. And that's when this great escape across the lines came. It took a long while to end when it was shot at. But the business of how one got married, I suppose, to be brief, was partly because we didn't have a home at all. We left home at 8, didn't see our parents except in summer holidays. And I would have preferred to marry somebody else. It would have been a great success, but I was 16 and that was too young.
The story of your escape is an incredible tale out of occupied France into Vichy France.
Another theme in this thing, the illusion of freedom, because you think, we've made it, we're free, the free zone. And the Vichy thing was so disappointing. You were not free at all. You couldn't move without a permit. You were arrested the whole time. People disappeared. And it was a mockery. There were posters on the trees with lies about England. You know, Français, remember, merci, all these things. And it was, where is freedom? Then you escape through Spain, Argentina, you get to America. And people were fussing about sugar rationing, and they thought concentration camps were propaganda. And at the same time, it was marvellous to get to America and to be able to eat, simply because we'd been starved. And there was Howard Hughes and El Morocco, and everything was unbelievable. You know, so it's the mosaic is that it's...
That sure is a mosaic. There also is in your personal life, so much as you tell in the book. You never really managed to marry either of the two men that you
Well, that
you
was
loved.
fate. That wasn't my choice. The first one, apparently, one was too young, and the second one is a rather tragic love story in Madrid, but that was completely fate that intervened, you know, otherwise it would have been a very good thing. Spain in the 50s comes into that. That was, I don't know if you were there, but
So,
extraordinary.
just before my time.
I know.
And the two other men in your life, your second husband, you refer to only as the Maréchal. Why don't you give him his name?
Well, I don't know. It's rather hard to tell you that. Can I?
Yes,
I
all right.
didn't want to give him his name. All right?
It must be a first, though, an autobiography where you don't tell people the name of your husband.
Well, I mean, one could have not mentioned him at all, but he was very important because he kidnapped the daughter, who meant that I lost the job with Magnum. And therefore, if he's going to come in, one must highlight all the amusing good sides of this person who was rather glamorous and so on, but there were things that better left unsaid. I don't know how to say.
But you had
Sorry, Glenn, please.
You had an enormously exciting time, it seemed to
It's
me.
true.
You enjoy the thing is full of, in the middle of crossing from one side of France to the other, you somehow managed to get taken to the opera and go to the bullfight, and then when you were down on your uppers in London, you go and have a dinner at an expensive restaurant. There's a wonderful phrase somewhere in your book about how you shed your tears on the soft voile handkerchiefs of Arnold Goodman, which is a wonderful sort of meaningful phrase. You survived really by your incredible glittering band of contacts and friends and social
That was
acquaintances.
just a fluke. I mean, the people you know, here we are, you're all glittering and wonderful, and we're together, and if we survive, because, I mean, the people mentioned in that just happened to form part of the pattern of this thing. They were there at a certain time when, why mention anything?
Well, when you look back on your life, I mean, are your recollections coloured, do you think? Or do they change when you start putting them down in a book? Do they become more interesting, more glamorous, more...
It was very difficult putting them all down like that. I didn't mean to do it like that. I meant to write a series of sketches and articles, and the publisher said, let's have your story in this, and that's the most tricky thing, because as you say, you sort out, well, who do you talk about, who do you not? And the people there, either they played a part in... You can say that capital cities have vintage years, so all the people of, say, Paris in the days of when Gene Kelly was making An American in Paris or something, that's amusing to put that in because he was part of the background. But otherwise, why bother? I mean, you can... I think you're saved from what happens to you by just plodding on.
Well, in Volume 2,
Holding on.
please say that you were at Start the Week with Glyn Worsnip and Sandy
Absolutely.
Gall and Phil Young and Kevin Mulhern and all the other people. That'll be in Part 2. I don't want to stop you, but you're quite right in saying we've got to talk to Sandy Gall. What do you... Go on, you ask Sandy something then. Go on, what would you like to ask Sandy?
I wanted to hear about it.
Well, go on.
You
go on.
ask him, it's your...
I'd like to ask her one question.
Go on, then.
there, because Capa, as we know, is one of the great war photographers, and he's remembered perhaps best for that wonderful shot of the soldier, the man being apparently shot, and he took the picture at the very moment when the bullet hit
The
him.
Spanish Civil War.
It has been suggested perhaps he faked it. Did he?
No. I've heard that, and I wish he were alive to ask him. Perhaps one could ask Cartier-Bresson, who's alive in Paris at the moment, but I don't believe that, no. I think he was there. The one love of Capa's life was called Gerda, and she was killed in that war, and that was his first extraordinary experience, and if you take a photograph, you're there, after all.
Yes.
I don't think it could be faked.
No, I wouldn't have thought so either.
I would certainly not settle for it.
Here is Sandy Gall, there, on the streets of Saigon, end of April 1975, when the North Vietnamese tanks were rumbling in.